Hi, welcome to episode 3 of Cracking the Codex Adeptus Mechanicus. This week we are looking at the Skitarii Hunter Cohort. I'm Ed, and I'm joined as always by John. How are you doing today, John?
Yeah, really good. I'm excited to see if we can play a Skitarii list that isn't just 20 bricks of the infantry just doing boring things. So,
Yes, the heydays of ninth edition where you'd be running 120 models and some planes. Always a fun time to see that across the table from you. But yeah, I'm quite excited about this detachment as well. It's the one of the two that are really disparate from the other detachments where you're not even necessarily running any breaches. They're still good, but you might just go for more the
yeah,
vanguard scoring approach, which is always quite fun to see. A higher skill cap usually, but
yeah.
it's really interesting to see picked up by better players. So, what do you get in the Skitarii Hunter cohort? Your faction trait is Stealth Optimization. This gives your infantry, mounted, and Iron Strider Ballistari units stealth, so -1 to hit in the shooting phase. And your Sicarian units get the benefit of cover if they are shot from over 12 inches away. Nice. It makes your sort of half tanky units, the Sicarian units, a little tankier than they would be normally. The combination of -1 to hit and the benefit of cover make them harder to pick up. They already, have the 2 wounds and the 5 of
Yeah.
infant. It just sort of pushes the scoring units into a little bit more of a a tanky mid range, or you can do more with them.
Yeah.
Stratagems. This, as with all of the Vanguard detachments, has a great suite of stratagems. Interestingly, none of these are battle tactics, which is good because obviously Skitarii can't make battle tactics free. They can repeat them with the marshals, but you can't be penalized if your opponent is running a Calades Assassin and increasing the cost of your battle tactics. Um, in this case, they've got nothing to increase apart from, command point reroll or something along those lines. So, first of all, Bionic Endurance. It's your opponent's shooting phase or any of the fight phases after an enemy unit has selected its targets and target a Sicarian, Taraxi, or Sidonian unit from your army. You can give that unit a 5 phase. This is great. It makes the maths really sort of throw off. If you're putting it on, for example, if they're putting 2 damage attacks into Sicarian infiltrators, that 5-up film pain really makes it difficult for them to shift. You can put it on, a lone dragoon that's stood an objective. Suddenly, giving it a 5-up film pain makes it a lot harder to get rid of. You might find that you have more primary going into your next turn, depending on where your opponent's positioned. Just a great flexible strat, 1 CP, really nice defenses there. Coming up, we've got the only 2 CP strat, which is Binary Offense. And this is at the start of your shooting phase or the start of any fight phase. You select 2 Skitarii units specifically that haven't shot or fought yet, and 1 enemy unit. You have to put all of your attacks into that enemy unit from the 2 squads you shot. However, you increase the AP of all attacks equipped by models in your units by 1. So this can bump your flamers up to AP1, your taser goes up to AP1, or you can put, more firepower into a single unit than you might expect you would, which is good because you're not necessarily playing the highest damage dealing units in this army. So having something to be able to slam a couple of CP into, increase the output is very valuable. We've got Expedited Purge Protocol, 1 CP. In your charge phase, you select 1 Skitarii unit, and you can charge even if you advance. This is obviously not going to be particularly useful on the Dragoons with Lances. They have advance and charge anyway. But, if again, we're talking infiltrators, if you want to get your sort of vaguely melee units into their scoring chaff in the midboard, gives you a lot more reach. Isolate and Destroy, 1 CP. In your shooting phase, you select 1 Sicarian, Taraxi, Sidonian, Iron Strider Ballistari, or Skitarii mounted unit that is not shot yet. And if they're targeting an enemy unit that doesn't have any friendly units within 6 inches, so it's the only enemy unit in that sort of area, you gain 1 wound. Again, you're not necessarily taking the highest output units, so being able to buff the output +1 to wound is a very strong ability to have on your units, where you're looking at more sort of quantity over quality of shots. 1 CP for Shroud Protocols. This is in your opponent's shooting phase after they've selected a target. You pick 1 Skitarii infantry unit that was selected as the target, and it can't be targeted if the attacking model is outside of 12 inches. This is the Nurgle strat you might have heard people refer to. Obviously, after they select your unit, you spend the CP. If the unit is no longer a valid target, they do get to reselect, so they don't just lose the shooting. But it's fantastic for sticking a squad of Vanguard out in the open, score you some primary going to the next turn, make it so that they can't be targeted outside of 12 inches, making your opponent have to play in a different way. And it's another one of those stratagems that we see where you might not even spend the CP on it, but just reminding your opponent that you do have it makes them play in a different way. These are really strong stratagems. What do you think of this one specifically?
So I love it because then if people want to kill that unit,
Mm,
they will then maybe push harder than they probably should just to mitigate it, and then they leave themselves potentially open for then you to then respond.
mm,
So often it's them being out of position or a little bit more open, and then gives you options like if they've come a bit more forward, maybe their screening behind isn't so strong, so then you can drop stuff behind. It completely changes the dynamic of the game for me, and I love it.
yeah. Yeah, any way that you can affect how your opponent has to position their models or how they play the game, taking them out of their game plan and having to respond to your game plan is a great tool to have. Finally, we've got programmed withdrawal 1 CP. Speaking of making your opponent have to play in different ways, this is a great one. End of your opponent's fight phase, you can pick up to 2 Sicarian units or 1 Skitarii infantry or mounted unit. So 2 of the, say, infiltrator squads or 1 of the general infantry, and you remove those units from the battlefield, put them in strategic reserves. They do have to be over 3 inches away from enemy units, so this is slightly more restrictive than some of the other detachments where it's just outside of engagement range. This is still great. It's got the conditional. You can pick up 2 units if you're taking the Sicarian, or 1 if you're not. But it's really opens up the scoring, which is what we see the Vanguard style lists want to play around. Moving on to the enhancements, and this really doubles down on the same theme. We start off with the Cantic Thrallnet. It's 25 points, and you can select 1 Skitarii unit within 12 inches of the bearer until the start of the next battle round. The Protector and Conqueror imperative are both active for that unit. I'm not particularly amazed by this, to be honest. It's the units that you
Yeah,
can buff up don't necessarily need the buff to their shooting. It's fine. It's not something that I'm going to put 25 points on a model into. Key to note, it does have to go on a Skitarii Marshal. Realistically, all of these are going to go on a Skitarii Marshal because 2 of them, the Thrallnet and the Veiled Hunter, can only go on the Marshals. The other 2 can go on Skitarii models, but the only other Skitarii model is the Skratos, which is the boy on stilts. Probably don't want to put things that buff units onto a low knot model. It doesn't feel like that's particularly useful. So Thrallnet,
yeah,
not super jazzed. Don't worry about it. The other 3 are pretty exciting. Clandestine Infiltrator for 20 points. You put it on a Skitarii model, and the bearer and models in any unit they are leading have the Infiltrator and Scout 6 ability. This is an
nice.
incredible combination. If you've played against Space Marines at all, when they're running 2 units of scouts in every list, you'll know that it's so annoying to deal with. They will put their scouts 6 inches away from where they want them to be, and if they go first, great, we'll move it there. And if they go second, they'll move it back behind the wall that they've also pre-measured to.
Yes.
Being able to do that yourself is just such a great boon to have. You can put it on a unit marshal that is attached to Rangers or Vanguard. Just obviously they're not going to kill all that much, but getting them up the board, getting them into the sort of scoring positions early is very valuable. We've got Veiled Hunter for 20 points. This is, again, Skitarii Marshal only. After both players have deployed the armies and determined who has the first turn, you can redeploy up to 3 Skitarii infantry units. You can put them into strategic reserves as well, even if, this can go above your cap on strategic reserves, which is not something I necessarily recommend because it's very easy for your opponent to flood the board. But these sorts of shenanigans are always very strong. Being able to redeploy, you can potentially deny a flank, you can respond to your opponent's deployment, you can put stuff into reserves where you go, actually, this isn't going to be very useful on the board. Just having that 20 points to make your opponent think about how they're deploying more and give you a bit of a response is very good. Finally,
Yeah.
we've got the Battle Sphere uplink. 30 points here. And in the shooting phase, after the bearer's unit is shot, if it's not in engagement range, it can make a normal move of up to 6 inches, but then can't charge. Fire and Fade, great. Really, really good.
Perfect.
Yeah. I love this on any unit that starts in reserve. Coming on, even if it comes on from strategic reserve, come in 6 inches from the board edge, shoot something, scoot onto an objective there, or move into an opponent's deployment zone if you're trying to get behind enemy lines.
Yeah.
Or there's so much use for it. It's a really valuable ability.
Yeah, because coming in from strat reserves, quite often on some of the missions you can't tow onto an objective.
Yeah,
So it fixes that problem.
absolutely. It's the For example, in the UKTC, where we play a lot of our games, currently 2 out of the 5 base missions, you can strategic reserve onto a point, but the other 3, you can't. So having that flexibility to just get
Yeah.
where you need to be is very strong. So we've got a list here. This is Johnny Simmons, who went 4-1 at the Nottingham GT. I think it's a great example of just a very exciting list that doesn't necessarily want to play in the same way. It does have 2 units of 6 Cataphront breaches. I think they're just so good that it's hard not to put them in any list. We will see post FAQ if that's where admechs
Yeah.
still are. I don't think they necessarily need to be nerfed. It's just if other things come down in points
Yeah.
to
If
make.
they go up a touch and other things go down a touch, it might then adjust the balance, perhaps.
Yeah. At 290 points for 6, I'm not excited for them to go up any points.
Yeah, I don't think they
But
will.
if other things
But
come down, I'd be
I think that's
interested to
where it'll
see
be, yeah.
what else we've got. So, funnily enough, he has taken the 3 enhancements that we just talked about that were the exciting ones. He's got 3 marshals, one with the infiltrator, one with the veiled hunter, one with the uplink. So just to refresh, he gives one of his attached units of vanguard or rangers, infiltrators and scouts. He gives veiled hunter, so one of them just has a redeploy for 3 of his infantry units, and then the battle sphere uplink, he has fire and fade on one of the units there. He's also got the 2 Manipulus, which go with the breaches. They're just good. You just put them in every list. Triple Dune Rider is very interesting. Obviously, one of the weaknesses of these sorts of lists is being picked up to indirect fire or melee. So having, effectively a rhino that can sit behind a wall and you can stage out of with your infantry is very good. Moving on, he's got the scoring units. Gone for the sterilizers here instead of the Skystalkers, which is interesting.
Yeah.
I guess Johnny probably feels that he's got enough scoring with this list and he doesn't need the fire and fade that Skystalkers bring. Instead, he's got reroll wounds with his flamers. This can be combined with the strat for extra AP if you put multiple units into one enemy unit. Quite an interesting adaptation there. This is a list that actually being able to bring a little bit more firepower is probably valuable. And then he's got an interesting suite of scoring units. He's got 1 squad of the infiltrators, 1 individual ballistari, and 2 individual dragoons with Jezzails. The dragoons with Jezzails are 45 points. That is fairly nuts for how tanky they are. They're, I believe, 7 wounds with a 5 up invuln, reasonable toughness. You can slap them with a 5 up feel no pain for a single point. Just a great unit to put onto an objective early, make it so your opponent has to commit to the board, and you can start scoring points. What do you think of this one, John?
So I really like things like the tech of the Dune Riders as well, because if you've got your guys coming out of them,
Yeah.
the Dune Riders have got the fire support ability, so if they make a hit successfully at a target, they get reroll the wound rolls for the guys that are disembarked out, which I really think is kind of a thing that when you've got a lot of this sort of stuff that's kind of mid-range shooting, it isn't particularly going to take out bigger targets. It helps you deal with some of the chewier stuff,
Yeah.
which I think fixes a problem whilst also being a defensive place to put those units as well initially. So I like that as a bit of tech because it's very much like in Space Marines you could do it with Razorbacks, does a similar sort of thing, which is nice, but it's lesser played because I think there's other ways to spend your points. But that, and I really like the solo dragoons because they're so nippy. There's the strat to then have them advance in charge if you really needed them to.
Yeah.
But
Obviously, they
it's
don't have
not their
any.
main target. But
Yeah,
it's
it's
more
not. They don't
if you just want to tag something as much as anything.
exactly. Yeah, they don't have melee output, but being able to charge,
Yeah.
you know, some incredibly strong shooting unit that doesn't have fall back and shoot turn 1 is
Yeah.
brutal.
It feels like a list that's very well honed. So Johnny was one of the players local-ish to us that during the index was still soldiering on to great
Yeah.
success. So to me it feels like a person that loves and cares for the army as well, which it very much, you look at it and go, he's using units that he loves, but also they all have a purpose. There doesn't seem like there's anything that's just in there for the sake of it. It all has very specific roles in mind, which I love.
Yeah, absolutely. No, great list. Obviously worked out well for him. Went 4-1 at Nottingham. Lovely. Well, thank you for watching. We will be back tomorrow